how we bridge the gap between activist circles and more normie circles, but more specifically, the problems with how we're bridging those circles and the experiences of those who are in those circles. So when I first came out as trans, I was involved in a lot of online trans circles, and I was almost constantly filled with frustration and rage at cisgender people in general. And the reason why is because I was living in a very toxic situation. For all of my dad's growth and development since that point, I was not living in a good place. And I was constantly being berated and put down and disrespected, misgendered, called all sorts of names, compared to all sorts of things. And it got really, really bad. So when I talked to people about trans experiences, or they asked questions of me, like, why wouldn't you just stay a girl? Isn't it easier that way? Or when did you choose to become trans? When I first heard these things, I was incensed. I was furious. Because in all of these trans spaces, all of this anger that we held for our own experiences at the hands of our parents or teachers or siblings or family or friends or society at large, you know, all of this anger swirled around and became our narrative. The narrative of anger, or the anger doctrine, as I might call it, is so prevalent in these spaces, especially when we are finally realizing just how fucked the system is against people like us. And so when I would communicate with people about trans issues, I would often do it from a place of defensiveness. And that was the first thing that people would encounter. If I was the first trans person they'd met, a lot of times they'd probably come away thinking, damn, these guys are all so angry and they really hate cis people. You know, I asked him a simple question and he blew up at me. And that's because they don't realize when they ask these questions just how frustrating these questions are to us. Because we, especially in the beginning of our transitions, or for those who never medically transition, which is completely valid, we are constantly on the defensive just by nature. And so we are constantly having to justify our choices to other people, our choice to transition or not to transition, our choice to go by a certain name or by certain pronouns, our choice to wear certain clothing or present ourselves in a certain way. And because we're constantly defending our choices, we fall into this trap where that is the first response that we have to people, is being on the defensive. And that is not our fault. And that is not necessarily the fault of people asking the questions. These are systemic issues that we are facing. And an individual may have a big role in that. Maybe they're a politician. Maybe they are some public figure who has a lot of sway in the narrative that's spread around trans people. Or maybe they're just Mike from the Verizon store, and they don't really know a whole lot about this trans thing. So when you're thinking on an individual level, as much as it's tempting to have anger towards individuals, and rightfully so when they do bigoted stuff, I am not taking that away from anybody. I have yelled at people before. I have almost gotten physical with people before, and I'm not proud of that. But when someone in good faith is coming to ask questions, it is so hard for us to remain calm and level-headed. And there's a reason for that. It's trauma. It's the same exact reason why someone like me who's dealt with PTSD gets so upset and can even, end up in a panic attack if I see certain things that trigger that PTSD. That's not something that I control myself. I can relieve some of that pressure through things like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, or just getting help in general is really helpful, having people to talk to. But there's a certain response that we have based on our experiences. And I think the problem is that because we have those experiences, we want to be in the public eye. We want to be out there giving our piece, basically. We want to be out there advocating for our rights, as is our right to do so. But when we're first in those spaces, it is very hard to be even-tempered when we're talking about things that literally threaten our lives. And this can be extremely difficult for us to to bridge that gap when we are coming to terms with who we are. And sorry, I'm trying to search something because I want to say the name correctly of someone who said it best. Let me just find her. Let me find her. Why won't I find her? Okay, let's see here. So I think that the best example of this is Jen from The Wind Down, which is a fantastic YouTube channel. You should totally subscribe. All of my 9 subscribers. But I think she put it best in one channel where she was discussing atheists in the atheist community when they're first getting into the community and they're first getting involved in their atheism and getting out of maybe toxic religious experiences or reflecting on latent Christianity. All of that is something that I went through when I first came to the atheist community. And she said it best when she said, if you are realizing that you are an atheist and you're getting involved in the atheist community, take a year to shut the fuck up and just live your life, get a hobby, engage in the community, but shut the fuck up. And I think that's honestly really good advice, is that you will be so tempted to get involved with this community and just really go ham when you're talking to people outside the community. And that could be really, really harmful because your first instinct is to lambast everyone who doesn't agree with you and say, why aren't more people talking about this? Why don't you understand where I'm coming? Excuse me, I'm hiccuping all day. Why don't you understand where I'm coming from? And that's not really the best approach. It's not the best approach practically. It's not the best approach emotionally, because all you're doing is adding more toxicity to an already traumatized community, in the case of trans people, for example. And it's also just not the best idea optically. And as much as it sucks to have to think about optics, as much as it sucks to have to think about how people perceive you when talking about civil rights, we kind of have to. It is imperative that we think about optics. And I know that I sound like a broken record echoing every leftist YouTuber, but it's important. And as a member of several marginalized communities, you know, I don't think it's bold of me to say this and to stress the importance of optics. So this is a continuation of my video talking about cultivating a community where more normie types can come together with folks who are involved in activist circles to talk about the hard questions. But I think that the people who should be representing that community or those disparate communities within that larger community should be people who have had time to process and to heal from their own trauma. That's not to say that all of us are going to be perfectly, civil all the time. But I want to stress that we should not be bringing in the voices of people who are still hurting, because the best things that they can do is not engage for their own health with people who are going to be asking difficult questions, for people who are going to be asking questions that they already hear day in and day out. This is not the kind of community where we are going to be holding each other close and getting through those traumatic experiences and giving resources for, well, we can always give resources for mental health. I think that's really important for any good community to say, we can talk about our issues, we can vent, but here's resources to actually get help. I think that's awesome. But this should not be a space where people are putting themselves at risk of having that trauma come back to them because they're being asked difficult questions. I think this is specifically a space to bridge it, to bridge that gap. And then after that, we can start talking about what we can do to be better allies to activists who aren't past that point, where they're still healing and they're still dealing with trauma or they're still in toxic environments. So I've ranted enough. I'm going to go get my queso because it's at the door and it's probably been there for about 5 minutes now. So y'all have a good one. Be good to each other.